The sound of tearing paper cut through the airport like a blade, and Amara felt her breath lock inside her chest as the officer ripped her boarding pass in half and held the pieces like a trophy, while the people around them slowed and stared, and the rolling suitcases fell quiet, and the gate announcement faded beneath a wave of murmurs and raised phones, and the hot sting of shame pressed against her throat. But her feet did not move, and her eyes did not fall, because she had learned long ago that you face the storm by standing tall. The officer was broad-shouldered and sure of himself, and his name tag flashed as he stepped closer and spoke in a voice that carried authority and something colder, and he said, "Passengers like you keep making trouble, and we are not letting you on this flight." And his grin showed that he expected her to beg and crumble and apologize for simply existing where he believed she did not belong. Amara felt the cold edge of panic try to climb her spine, and she shoved it down, because panic was a luxury for people with time, and she had no time, and she had no safe place to fall, and she had a father waiting on the other side of the country, and he had told her to get on the first flight and come to him because a storm was coming, and he needed to see her with his own eyes and hear what she had found, and she had promised him she would. Her hands shook, but her voice steadied, and she said, "You need to give me a supervisor, and you need to do it now." And the officer laughed and said, "There is no supervisor who will help you." And he tossed the torn pieces of her pass to the floor and stepped on them as if smashing her chance beneath his boot, and the crowd gasped, and the cameras in their hands rose higher, and someone whispered, "This is going too far," and another voice said, "Record everything." And a child tugged on his mother's sleeve and asked, "Why is that man being mean?" And the mother shushed him. With eyes full of worry, Amara felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she did not let it fall, and she lifted her chin and said, "You need to know who my father is." And the officer blinked like a man who had just felt a drop of rain and looked up at a sky that might split open, and he said, "Who is that supposed to be?" And she kept her gaze steady and said, "The head of Homeland Security." And the words moved through the air like a switch pulled inside a tower, and the lights in the officer's confidence flickered and dimmed for a heartbeat. He stood frozen, and in that breath of silence, a man in a dark suit detached from the watching crowd and stepped forward with smooth steps and a smile that did not reach his eyes, and he said, "We can handle this quietly." And he flashed a badge, so quickly that only the officer saw it, and nodded like a man who had just found a ladder out of a hole, and the officer's laugh died on his lips, and his boot slid off the torn pass, and he shifted back a step, and the cameras in the crowd leaned in closer as if they could smell a change in the wind. The man in the suit turned to Amara and spoke with the warm calm of a flight attendant on a smooth morning, and he said, "Miss, you have had a difficult experience, and we apologize, and we can arrange a private conversation so we can resolve this without more disruption." And his tone stroked the air like velvet, and yet something under the velvet felt like a wire. Amara's fingers tightened around the handle of her small backpack, because inside it lay a thin envelope with a single page, and the page carried a name, and the name carried danger, and this was the reason. Her father had told her to come at once, and not tell anyone, and use the back entrance to the terminal, and sit away from windows and keep moving, and she had done all of it, until the moment the officer singled her out at the gate, and asked questions that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with control, and the ripping of the pass felt less like a rule and more like a message. She looked at the man in the suit, and her skin whispered that something was wrong, and her father had taught her to listen when her skin whispered, and she said, "Thank you, but I will call my father now." And the man's smile twitched, and he said, "Of course, call him right now, we will wait." And his eyes slid to the officer, and the officer looked away, as if suddenly embarrassed by his own boldness, and the phones around them kept recording, and a woman in a yellow scarf moved closer and said softly to Amara, "I am here if you need a witness." And Amara nodded with gratitude that warmed the cold places inside her chest. Amara pulled out a sleek black phone and unlocked it with a code only two people knew, and she scrolled past the normal contacts until she found a hidden number that did not show a name, and she tapped it and lifted the phone to her ear, and silence hummed like a tight wire, and then a voice answered with a single word that sounded like a door unbolting, and she said, "It's me." And the voice softened and said, "Are you safe?" And she said, "I am at the gate, and a cop tore my ticket, and a man in a suit says he wants to help." And the voice paused, and then sharpened like a blade. "Step back from him," the voice said, "and do not go anywhere private, and keep your phone on speaker, and put me close to your chest, and tell me the number on his badge, and tell me the officer's name, and tell me who else is near." And Amara breathed in and out, and said, "I see a woman in a yellow scarf. I see a man holding a toddler. I see a gate agent with tired eyes and a lanyard that reads Layla. And I see the officer's name. It says Keller, and the man in the suit is standing too close, and the badge flashed only for a second, and the voice on the phone said, 'Then ask him to hold it steady.'" Now Emira lifted her voice so the crowd could hear, and she said, "Sir, I need to read your badge properly." And the man in the suit glanced at the cameras and then at her phone, and something flickered in his gaze, and he smiled again, and he raised the badge. And she read the number, and the name, and the agency, and the voice on the phone went very quiet, and then said, "Thank you," and then said, "Keep your eyes on his left hand, and do not let him move behind you, and in exactly 8 seconds a second team will approach from your right, and they will show you a different badge, and you will go with them, and not with him." The man in the suit shifted his weight, and lowered his voice, though he knew the phones could still hear, and he said, "Miss, this spectacle is unnecessary, and you are only making this worse for yourself, and for the officer who misunderstood, and if you step with me, we can get you on a later flight with no further trouble." And he reached out, as if to guide her elbow, and a cold river of fear slid through her body, because his touch felt like possession, not protection, and she took a single step back, and the crowd seemed to lean toward her, as if ready to catch her if she fell. Keller cleared his throat, and said, "Sir, if this is handled, then I will return to my post." And the man in the suit did not look at him, and said, "Hold your position." And Keller froze again, because his authority had just been placed in a smaller box, and the phones around them caught every twitch and every swallow and every shift of feet, and somewhere a child began to cry, and the mother lifted him and pressed his face into her shoulder. The airport announcement returned with a new gate call that no one heard. Leela, the gate agent, took a brave step forward and said to the suited man, "Sir, we are delaying the flight, and the passengers need to board, and if there is no safety issue, then we should resolve this without harming anyone." And the man in the suit cut her a glance that carried a warning, and she stopped mid-step, but she did not back away, and she stayed near Amara, as if drawing a small circle of protection with her presence. Amara's mind rolled through every lesson her father had given her about reading rooms and reading people and watching hands, and she saw the suited man's left hand hover near his jacket, and she heard her father's voice again through the speaker saying, "Left hand on the jacket indicates a concealed item or a communication device, and keep your right shoulder open, and keep your path to the exit clear, and keep breathing steady, because steady breath keeps the mind clear, and a clear mind survives." The suited man's smile cooled another degree, and he said, "Miss, your father is a busy man, and he would not want you to make a scene, and you are alone here, and no one will thank you for forcing this to become bigger than it needs to be." And Amara felt anger lift inside her like a wave, and she let it carry her voice as she said, "I am not alone," and she raised the phone so the crowd could hear, and her father spoke through the speaker with a calm that filled the space like a shield, and he said to the man in the suit, "Identify your field office and your supervising officer." And the man's lips parted, then closed, and his eyes flashed, and the crowd murmured, because the power had shifted again, and they could feel it. Keller took another step back, as if distance might erase his earlier bravado, and his fingers twitched near his radio, and a faint beep sounded from a body camera on his chest, and he looked as if he wanted to turn it off, and the woman in the yellow scarf said loud enough for the phones to catch, "Keep that camera on." And Keller let his hand fall and swallowed hard, and the shame on his face looked real now, as if he understood that he had crossed a line he could not defend. Mara held the phone steady against her heart, and felt the beat of her own fear and the steadiness of her father's breath and the weight of the envelope in her bag, and she knew that if she stepped into a hallway with the wrong person, she might never see the gate again, and she also knew that the page in her bag would not stay secret if she vanished, and that was the point of secrets. They either saved you or swallowed you, and you did not know which until pressure pressed on every side. A small ripple moved through the crowd near the right, and 2 figures in dark blazers appeared, with badges raised, and their faces were known to news cameras, and to the officer who went pale, and to the man in the suit whose smile finally cracked at the edges. And Amara felt her father's voice steady and low in her ear, and he said, "Those are mine, and you are safe, and in 10 steps they will be beside you, and you will not speak another word to the man who tried to move you, and you will hand the envelope to Leela, because she stood with you when you were alone, and that matters in this world more than titles and more than swagger." The suited man saw the approaching figures, and his left hand slipped fully inside his jacket, and his right foot angled like a runner, ready to pivot, and the crowd inhaled as one, and Leela reached for Amara's elbow with a grip that said, "I am here," and Keller lifted his hands as if to show he would not interfere, and Amara felt the world pull tight. Like a wire that was about to snap, the two new agents were 3 steps away, when the airport lights near the gate flickered and a metallic thud echoed from somewhere behind the security doors, and the suited man leaned in with a whisper that tasted like poison, and he said, "You do not know what your father has done, and you do not know who is really hunting whom." And Mara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet as the thud became an alarm, and the boarding screen glitched, and the envelope in her bag felt suddenly heavy as a stone, and the man's hand moved inside his jacket, and the crowd surged back, and her father's voice rose once more in her ear with a single command that froze her in place and set the path for everything that would come next. The alarm screamed through the terminal, and the crowd scattered like startled birds, while the suited man's words still rang in Amara's ears, and her father's command through the phone pressed into her chest with an urgency she had never heard before, telling her to freeze, telling her not to take a step until the team reached her, and she gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles burned, while the envelope in her backpack weighed her down as if it knew the world was about to shift her. Two agents in dark blazers cut through the chaos, with their badges lifted and their voices sharp, instructing passengers to stay calm, to step back, to keep recording if they had already started, and the crowd obeyed because their presence radiated a kind of authority that did not wobble under pressure. And Officer Keller leaned back against the wall, his earlier arrogance melting into silence, while the man in the suit narrowed his eyes and for the first time looked corneredly, stayed close, her hand steady on Amara's arm, whispering, "We will get you through this, just hold on." And Amara nodded, though her breath felt tight in her lungs, and her father's voice hummed steady as a metronome, guiding her step by step, telling her to wait for the signal, telling her not to give the envelope to anyone but the right hands, and reminding her that every eye in the airport was now witness, and that was her shield. When the agents reached her side, they formed a wall between her and the suited man, and one of them leaned toward her phone and said, "Director, we have her secured," and the voice of her father shifted from urgency to command as he said, "Move her to conference room 7, keep her in public sight, and do not separate her under any condition." And the suited man let out a laugh that sounded more like a warning than humor, and he said, "You are still playing the old game, David, but you never told your daughter who paid the price last time." Mara froze at the sound of her father's name on the lips of the man who was supposed to be an enemy, and the way he said it carried history and betrayal and something darker, and she turned her face toward the phone, whispering, "Dad, what is he talking about?" But her father's voice came back, cold as steel, saying, "Do not listen to him. He is trained to sow doubt and confusion, and every word he speaks is poison." But the suited man tilted his head and smiled and said, "You never told her about Damascus, did you?" The crowd gasped, though most of them did not know what the word meant, only that it was heavy with something secret and sharp, and Amara felt her throat close around questions she could not form, and she saw the flicker in Leela's eyes, as if she too wanted to ask. But the agents did not falter. They flanked her and pushed gently through the corridor, moving her toward the side doors, while the alarm still howled overhead, and the suited man's voice rose above the noise, calling out, "David, you can protect her from me, but you cannot protect her from the truth." And Amara's knees nearly buckled at the force of those words. They reached the secured hallway, and one of the agents whispered into his radio, confirming clearance, while the other kept his eyes on every movement around them. And Amara pulled the envelope from her bag, her fingers trembling as if the paper itself carried electricity, and she pressed it to her chest and whispered to Leela, "He said give this to you." And Leela's eyes widened, but she took it with both hands like a sacred object and tucked it close to her heart without looking at its contents. And Amara's father's voice on the phone softened and said, "That was the right choice, my girl, because sometimes you only know who you can trust by who stands beside you when the world turns against you." But before relief could settle, a crack like thunder split the air, and the security shutters over the main doors slammed down, locking passengers inside, and a mechanical voice announced lockdown procedures, and the suited man's laughter echoed from the gate, even though he was now surrounded by local police and security officers, and he shouted, "Above the chaos, that envelope will burn you, because inside it is not a secret, it is a confession." Amara's chest heaved, and she turned to the agents demanding answers, but they kept moving her forward, and one of them said, "Stay." "Quiet, stay low, we will explain when we are clear," and her father's voice said, "Hold your breath, hold your courage, do not look back." And Amara obeyed, though every nerve screamed with questions about Damascus, about betrayal, about the envelope that was no longer in her hands. They rounded the corner into a quieter hall, and for a moment the world seemed still, except for the pounding of her heart, and the agents signaled each other before opening a secured door, and inside was a stark room with glass walls and a single table, and they ushered her inside, while Leela entered behind them, clutching the envelope tighter than ever, and Amara looked at her and saw that she was just as afraid, but still standing strong, and it gave her the strength not to collapse. Her father's voice came again through the speaker, softer now but carrying weight. "You are safe for the moment, but listen carefully. What you carry is older than both of us, and it is tied to choices. I made long ago choices I never wanted you to discover this way, but now the other side is moving faster than I expected, and they will stop at nothing to twist the truth and use you to destroy me." And Amara whispered, tears cutting her voice, "You promised me you never kept secrets from me." And he sighed heavy with regret and said, "Every secret has its season, and sometimes survival demands silence." Leela placed the envelope on the table and said, "Should I open it, Director?" And the line went silent for a breath too long before he answered, "Not yet, not until my people arrive, because once it is opened, there would be no going back." And the air in the room thickened with suspense, as if even the walls leaned closer to hear what was inside. But before the moment could settle, the lights flickered again, and the glass wall of the room darkened as a shadow moved outside, and a voice Amara recognized as the suited man whispered through the intercom, "Even when you run, even when you hide, even when you lock her away, you cannot protect her from the blood on your hands and the truth that waits inside that envelope." Amara's blood ran cold, and the agents drew their weapons, and Leela's grip on the envelope shook but did not loosen, and Amara's father shouted through the phone, "Stay with them, do not believe him." But Amara stared at the envelope and felt in her bones that opening it would either save her or destroy her, and the room filled with the weight of that choice as the suited man's laughter faded into the sirens. Question pressed harder than any alarm, harder than any threat should. She opened the envelope and faced what her father had buried, or hold on to it and live under the weight of not knowing hand. The decision could not wait much longer, because footsteps were approaching fast, and someone new was coming for them. The footsteps outside the glass door grew louder and steady, deliberate, not the rushed clatter of panicked travelers, but the measured beat of someone who knew exactly where they were going, and the agents tensed, their weapons drawn, eyes locked on the frosted panel as shadows moved closer. Amara pressed her back against the wall, the phone still in her hand, her father's voice a low warning in her ear, telling her to breathe, telling her not to break, telling her that fear was natural, but letting fear control her was a choice. Leila clutched the envelope tighter than ever, her knuckles white, her lips pressed shut, but her stance firm, as if she had already decided she would not hand it over, no matter who came through that door. The knob clicked, and the silence inside the room folded into itself. The agents aimed steady, and the door opened, slow, revealing not the suited man but a woman in a grey uniform with sharp eyes and a badge that read Federal Marshal, and she lifted her hands, palms out, to show she carried no weapon drawn, and said in a clear voice, "Stand down, I am here under direct order from Homeland, and the code is Blackbird Echo 9. The agents hesitated, then lowered their weapons an inch, exchanging quick glances, as if weighing whether the code was real. "Amara." His father's voice came through the phone like a strike. "Do not trust anyone who arrives without my confirmation." And the woman in the doorway narrowed her eyes as if she heard his voice even from the speaker, and she said, "Then put him on speaker so we can all hear him. Because if he does not authorize me, then none of this matters." The tension in the room tightened, and Amara's chest burned. She placed the phone on the table, speaker up, and her father's voice filled the room, asking her name and clearance, and the woman answered, smooth, precise, every syllable perfect, like someone who had trained for this moment. There was a pause, then her father said, "You were debriefed 2 years ago in Maryland. You saved a man named Roshan from an ambush." She nodded once yes, and he said then, "You are clear, but remember, you are not to touch my daughter, and not to take." The envelope relief rippled faintly through the room, though it did not loosen Amara's grip on herself. The marshal stepped closer, eyes flicking to the envelope in Leela's hand, then back to Amara. And she said, "They will come again, harder and faster, and we cannot stay boxed in here. Your father wants you moved to a more secure location, but there is something you need to understand. This envelope is not just evidence. It is bait, and the more you hold it, the closer danger will come. Leela's lips parted, but she stayed silent, waiting for Amara to choose. Amara stared at the envelope, feeling the pulse of her own blood in her fingers as if the paper itself had become alive. Her father's voice softened, as if speaking to her alone. Even though the room was full, he said, "I should have told you sooner, but everything in that envelope ties to a mission called Damascus. It was years before you were born, and it was supposed to end clean, but it did not, and the people who survived never forgave, never forgot, and now they want me broken, and they will use you to do it." Amara felt anger not in her chest, anger at him for secrets, anger at herself for not asking more questions, and anger at the officer who had torn her ticket, because that moment had been the spark for everything unraveling. She said aloud, "You told me, you never lied to me, and now I find out that my whole life has been built on silence and shadows." And her father sighed, heavily enough to crush stone, and said, "I never lied. I just never told you the whole story, and that is different, but not better, and I am sorry." The marshal cut in sharply. "We cannot unravel family history here. We need to move now. The alarms will draw them closer." One agent opened the door, scanning the hall while the other motioned for them to follow, and Amara felt her legs moving, though her mind screamed with questions. Leela stayed at her side, holding the envelope against her chest, as if it was her own lifeliner. Hall outside was quieter. The lockdown had cleared most travelers, but the echo of boots on tile came from a distance, and the marshal guided them toward a restricted wing, her pace fast but controlled, and Amara whispered, "What if the man in the suit comes back?" And the marshal replied, "He will come back, but not alone and not clean. And when he does, you must not let him speak, because his weapon is not the one he hides in his jacket. It is the story he carries, and once he plants doubt, it grows faster than fire." They reached a security door, and the agents keyed in a code. The lock clicked, and they ushered Amara and Leela inside a dimly lit corridor lined with cameras and reinforced glass. It felt colder here, like the air had been drained of warmth. The marshal spoke into her radio, confirming location and clearance, and then turned to Amara and said, "Your father is moving now to Piffer. He is not in Washington anymore. He is coming here because this cannot be solved from a distance." Amara's stomach flipped at the thought of seeing him sooner than expected, but the weight of his secrets pressed heavier than her hope. Leela finally spoke, her voice low but steady. She said, "Maybe we should open it now. Maybe the truth will guide us, because carrying silence is heavier than carrying answers." Everyone froze for a heartbeat. Then the marshal shook her head. "Not here, not without control," and Amara's father's voice returned sharp on the line, saying, "No, if you open it now, you put a target on your backs bigger than any weapon." And Leela clenched her jaw but lowered her gaze, though her fingers still refused to release the envelope. The group moved down the corridor, when suddenly the lights above them flickered, and a deafening bang shook the walls. The agents spun weapons up again, and the marshal pulled Amara behind her, as smoke hissed from vents overhead. Through the haze, a shape appeared. The suited man, his tie loosened, his jacket torn, but his smile intact, as if he had been waiting for this stage. His voice cut through the smoke like a blade, saying, "David, you sent your daughter into the fire without armor, and now she will learn what you did to us in Damascus." Samara's blood ran cold as the agents shouted commands, aiming at him, but he did not flinch. Instead, he lifted his left hand, slowly revealing not a weapon, but a small device, blinking red and green. The marshal cursed under her breath and said, "Jammer, he is cutting our lines." And even as she spoke, Amara's father's voice crackled, then dissolved into static. The line severed, leaving only the suited man's voice in the smoke. He took a step forward, raising his voice so Amara could hear above the chaos, saying, "Your father ordered the strike that killed children. He called it necessary. He called it collateral, and he built his career on the silence of that night." Amara's knees weakened, the word children ringing in her head like a bell of grief she had not asked for. The agents moved to flank him, but he triggered something on the device, and sparks rained from the cameras above the feed, dead the corridor blind. Leela clutched the envelope tighter, whispering, "He is lying, he must be lying." But Amara's heart pounded with confusion, because the suited man's eyes did not look like a liar's. They looked like someone carrying a wound that never healed. She screamed over the noise, "Tell me the truth." And he looked at her and said, "Open the envelope, and you will see who your father really is." The marshal fired a warning shot that sparked against the wall, and shouted, "Move back," but the suited man only laughed and dropped a smoke canister that filled the corridor with choking gray. In the chaos, strong hands grabbed Amara, pulling her away down a side hall while others fought to hold the line. She coughed, her lungs burning, and felt Leela beside her, still clutching the envelope, and through the haze she could hear the suited man's voice still calling her name, still telling her to open it, still planting doubt like seeds in her veins. When they finally burst through another secured door, the smoke thinned. But the silence inside the new room was worse than the alarms. Because now her father's voice was gone, her allies were scattered, and all she had was Leela the marshal and the envelope that seemed to breathe in her hands. Amara sank into a chair, shaking, and whispered, "What if he is telling the truth?" And the marshal knelt in front of her eyes, steady, and said, "The truth will cut you no matter what side it comes from, but you have to decide. If you are ready to bleed now, or wait until your father stands before you, because once you open that paper, you will never see him the same again." Leela laid the envelope on the table between them and whispered, "We cannot run forever. We need to know what we are carrying." And Amara stared at it, her pulse loud in her ears, her mind screaming with fear and fury and longing. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge, ready to tear it open when the door slammed wide, and new voices shouted commands, and for a split second, Amara did not know if they were friend or foe, if the next moment would save her or shatter her forever. And the envelope still waited, sealed, heavy and alive, with answers that could burn everything. To Ash, the door burst open with the force of a storm, and armed men in tactical gear rushed into the room, their black uniforms marked with no clear insignia, their faces half hidden behind visors. Their voices thundered, orders, "Hands up, don't move." And the marshal immediately stepped in front of Amara, her weapon raised but her posture sharp with caution, because she knew firing the first shot would end with them all on the ground. Leela pulled Amara back, her grip tight, her heart racing so loud Amara could hear it pounding through her hand. The envelope slid across the table with a sudden movement, and for a terrifying second it looked like one of the masked men might grab it, but none of them touched it. Instead, one stepped forward and barked, "We are here under federal order. We are taking custody of the girl and the package." The marshal's voice cut back cold and firm. "To show your clearance," and the man raised his hand, pulling a badge from his vest, flashing it quickly, but the motion was too fast, too practiced, and her instinct screamed it was false. The marshal kept her aim steady and said, "Slow it down, badge, and code now, or you are not moving her an inch." The masked man hesitated, and that tiny pause was enough to paint the air with doubt. Amara clung to Leela and whispered, "They are not real, are they?" And Leela shook her head ever so slightly, her lips pressed tight, because one thing she had learned in this unfolding nightmare was that silence sometimes protected more than questions. The lead masked man repeated his order, voice louder, angrier this time, but beneath the volume Amara could hear the slip of desperation. Like someone whose time was running out. Then from the shattered intercom came a burst of static, and her father's voice returned, ragged but alive. "Hold your ground. They are not mine." And the marshal fired one shot into the wall, deliberately a warning that made the imposters flinch. In that heartbeat of distraction, the real agents reappeared through the rear hall, their weapons drawn, their badges clear and unmistakable, and the corridor exploded into chaos. Shots cracked, smoke erupted, bodies slammed against glass, and Amara was pulled to the floor by Layla, who shielded her with her own frame, whispering, stay down, stay down." The fight lasted seconds, but it felt endless, until the imposters fell back, retreating into the smoke, dragging one of their wounded with them, leaving behind the sound of alarms and the bitter smell of burnt powder. The marshal holstered her weapon, breathing hard but steady, and the real agents secured the room, sealing the doors behind them. Amara pushed herself up, shaking from head to toe, and her father's voice came again. "Steadier now, you see what we are against. You see why I kept this from you." Amara's throat tightened with fury and fear, and she shouted into the phone, "Keep what from me, you say? It is to protect me, but all I see is blood and fire, and shadows of enemies I do not understand." Leela laid a hand on her shoulder, soft, grounding her before she spiraled, and the marshal turned away, giving her space, because emotions in a war zone were sometimes more dangerous than bullets. Her father's sigh came heavy through the speaker. "Amara, there was a mission 20 years ago in Damascus. We were told it was a safe house full of enemy planners, a strike that would cripple networks and save lives. But the intel was wrong. There were families there, children there, and when the strike came it burned them all." The pause that followed held ghosts and grief. "I signed the order. My superiors buried it. They called it clean and necessary. But men like the one who tore Your ticket know the truth because they were there, and they swore to drag it back into the light and use it to destroy everything I built. Amara's chest cracked with pain and betrayal because the suited man's words echoed now with weight. They were not just poison, they were planted in soil that was real, and she pressed her hands over her face, trembling. I do not know who to believe. Leela's voice cut in strong. Then believed what you saw with your own eyes today, who stood with you, who tried to take you, who shielded you when you were alone. Sometimes truth and lies both carry blood, but only actions tell you where to place your trust. The marshal nodded grimly. She was right. Whatever Damascus was, whatever guilt your father carries, that envelope does not just hold a memory, it holds leverage. And if you open it here, you are not just reading the past, you are detonating a bomb in the present. The weight of her words pressed down, and Amara stared at the envelope still lying on the table, as if it pulsed with its own heartbeat. Her father's voice sharpened again. Listen to me. They will keep coming because for them this is not about you, it is about me. But you are my blood, and that makes you the weapon they can wield. So you must decide soon. Do you stand with me and guard the secret, or do you break it open and let the world choose for itself? Amara felt the room spin, her breath unsteady, because how could she decide between truth and loyalty? Between her father's love and the cries of children she had never known but whose ghosts now haunted her skin. Leela caught her eyes, firm and gentle. We do not have to choose this second, but we do have to survive to the next one. The marshal snapped her fingers. Let's move now. Secure convoy is ready. We cannot hold here. They swept her from the room down reinforced halls into an underground garage where black vehicles waited, engines rumbling. The agents fanned out, scanning corners as if danger hid in every shadow, and maybe it did. Amara climbed into the back seat, clutching her phone, still on call, her father's breathing steady in her ear. Leela slid in beside her, the envelope locked against her chest, and the marshal took the seat, opposite, eyes never leaving the entrance, as the convoy rolled out into the night. But freedom did not taste sweet. The city outside was restless, sirens wailing in the distance, lights flickering as if the whole place bent under the same storm. Amara leaned her head against the cold window, whispering to herself, trying to hold the pieces of her world together. Her father spoke softly. Then, when I see you, I will give you every answer. I will not hide any more, but you must reach me first, alive. The convoy sped through dark streets, but Amara's mind was louder than the engines, louder than the sirens. She remembered the suited man's eyes burning with grief when he spoke of Damascus, and she remembered her father's voice cracking under the weight of confession, and both felt true in different ways. She pressed her fists to her temples, whispering, which one is the lie, which one is the weapon? Leela placed her hand gently on Amara's. She said, listen to me, you are more than your father's shadow, you are more than their war. The choice is not only his secret or his enemies, the choice is who you want to become after this ends. And Amara felt the truth in those words, settled deep, because Leela was right. This was no longer only about past missions or political games. It was about her survival, her transformation, and what she would stand for. When the last page was written, the convoy turned toward the federal building where her father was supposed to arrive within the hour. But just as they reached the final block, a deafening blast ripped through the street ahead, flipping the lead car in a spray of fire. The shockwave shattered glass. Amara screamed as the vehicle lurched, spinning into chaos. Agents shouted orders, pulling her down, covering her body with theirs, as debris rained across the street. Through the smoke and fire she saw figures moving, not panicked. Civilians, but armed silhouettes closing in. And then through the roar came a familiar voice. The suited man calling out her name, cutting through the flames with words that burned deeper than the fire itself, saying, Amara, the truth is not in your father's voice, it is in your hands. Open the envelope now, and you will see who wears the mask. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her father's voice shouted desperately through the phone. Do not listen. Keep it sealed. Stay with my people. But the envelope in Leela's grasp seemed to throb with urgency, as if every secret, every death, every betrayal had been waiting for this single moment to break free. The smoke curled, the fire raged, the agents fired back, and the world became a battlefield in the heart of the city. Amara sat trapped between two voices, one calling her to loyalty, one calling her to truth, and the choice that would define her life waited in the weight of that thin paper, sealed tight, but ready to shatter everything. And as the fire lit the night, she reached for it, trembling because one way or another the next breath she took would not be the same as the last. The fire on the street painted the night with orange light and the screams of sirens. blended with the crack of gunfire as the convoy scattered into chaos. Amara lay pressed against the seat, her hands trembling, her ears ringing while agents dragged her from the wrecked vehicle, shouting to stay low, stay behind cover, keep moving. The envelope still burned against Leela's chest as if it were alive and waiting, and Amara could feel its pull stronger than the heat of the flames. They ducked into a narrow alley, broken glass under their boots, and the air thick with smoke, and the marshal took the lead, her weapon sweeping corners, her voice calm but clipped, saying, "We moved 2 blocks east, secure location, rendezvous with the director." Amara stumbled, but Leela steadied her, her face streaked with soot, yet her eyes steady like anchors in a storm. Behind them, the suited man's voice echoed through the fire, distorted by the chaos, but still clear enough to cut Amara's skin open. With every word he shouted, "Your father ordered the strike on Damascus. He killed the children and buried the truth, and now he hides behind you to shield himself." His voice came closer, his silhouette visible for a moment, through the smoke like a phantom, pursuing her not with bullets, but with truth sharpened into blades. Amara's father's voice crackled through her phone, still clutched in her hand though. The line broke with static every few seconds, and he begged, "Do not listen to him. Stay with the marshal. Keep moving, keep breathing. I am minutes away." The alley twisted into another street, darker, emptier, but danger lived in every shadow. The agents moved like a shield around her, their breaths heavy through radios, their nerves tight but unshaken. Amara tried to steady herself, but her mind reeled with questions, spinning faster than her legs could keep up. She wanted to scream too, stopped to demand answers right there in the street, but the fire and the footsteps behind them left no space for stillness. Leila whispered in her ear, "Keep your eyes forward, do not give him your fear, because fear is what he feeds on." And Amara nodded, though her stomach knotted, and her throat ached, because she could not tell where her father's truth ended, and the suited man's truth began, and maybe both were truths at once, 2 sides of the same blade. They reached an abandoned subway entrance, the gates rusted, the lights dead, but the marshal gave a sharp nod and led them down the cracked stairs into the shadows. The deeper they went, the quieter the world above became, until only the drip of old pipes and the distant echo of boots filled the air. The marshal turned to the agents, one securing the rear, the other sweeping ahead. She faced Amara and said, "This is where we make the stand until extraction arrives, but extraction means nothing if we do not decide what to do with that envelope." Leela looked at Amara and whispered, "We cannot keep running forever. This is not survival. This is delay, and the paper in my hands feels heavier than all the bullets chasing us, because it is not just their weapon, it is ours, too, if we choose to use it." Amara's heart pounded. She looked at the envelope, then at her phone, then at the marshal, and she whispered, "What if what is inside destroys him? What if it destroys me?" The marshal's face was shadowed, but her voice was clear. "Then at least you will know who you are standing against and who you are standing with, because ignorance is another kind of chain." Her father's voice burst through the static, again commanding, "Hold your ground, hold the paper, do not open it yet. I will arrive and explain," and his voice cracked on the word explain, as if even he doubted the strength of his truth. The suited man's echo carried down into the subway from above, like poison seeping into water, saying, "Open it, Amara, open it, and see the blood on his hands before he buries you in his silence." Tears welled in Amara's eyes, her chest heaving with grief and rage, because she had been pulled into a war she never chose, and every step had been dictated by men with secrets and men with power, and the only thing she owned was the choice in front of her now. She wiped her face with trembling hands, and looked at Leila, then at the marshal, then at the envelope, and she whispered, "I cannot carry silence any more." She reached for the flap, her fingers sliding under the seal, her breath locked in her chest. Leila gripped her wrist once, as if to ask, "Are you sure?" And Amara nodded, because even if the truth burned her, she needed to feel its fire. She tore the envelope open, the sound sharp and final in the still air of the subway. Inside was a single folded page, stained with age and ink, faded, but legible. Amara unfolded it, her hands shaking, and the words stared back at her, black and sharp and undeniable. It was an operational order signed with her father's name, authorizing a strike on Damascus, with full acknowledgement that civilian presence was likely collateral. The language was cold, clinical, necessary strike, unavoidable, but in the margins in her father's handwriting, scrawled, desperate and broken, were the words, "No other option. They gave me no choice." Amara's chest cracked open. grief spilling out because the truth was not clean, it was not simple, it was guilt and justification tangled together, and it left her gasping for air. She whispered he knew children were there, and he signed anyway, and Leela caught her as her knees buckled, whispering, "Hold on, breathe, you are not alone." The marshal read over her shoulder, her jaw tight, her eyes unreadable, and she said, "This is more than a secret. This is evidence. This is leverage. This can topple governments if it leaves this tunnel." The agents exchanged grim looks, one muttering, "This will tear the country apart." Then the echo of footsteps grew louder above, and the suited man's voice descended like thunder, saying, "Now you know, Amara. Now you carry the truth, and you must decide if you will protect his lie or free the world from it." His words carried triumph and sorrow both, and they shook her more than the paper itself. Her father's voice returned faint through static, begging, "Amara, do not believe him. I was forced. It was a trap. They set me up, and if you release that page, they win. They destroy everything I built to keep you safe." His plea cut through her heart because it carried love, raw and real, even under the weight of guilt. Amara stood trembling in the dim light, the page clutched in her fist, her tears streaking down her face. Leela held her steady, whispering, "You do not have to decide for them. Decide for you. Decide who you want to be when this ends." The marshal's gaze was steady, hard, but not unkind, and she said, "The truth is a fire, child. It can burn you, or it can light your way. You must choose which it will be." The boots above closed and the suited man was coming. The agents raised their weapons, preparing for the clash. Amara looked at the paper, looked at her phone, looked at the faces of the only two people who had stood beside her in the storm, and she felt something inside her harden into resolve. She whispered, "I will not be his shield, and I will not be his weapon. I will be my own voice." She tucked the page inside her jacket against her heart, and stepped forward out of the marshal's shadow into the center of the room, her breath shaking, but her spine straight. She raised her voice so it echoed up the stairwell where the suited man approached, and so it carried through the phone where her father still listened. She said, "I have read the truth. I have seen what you both hide, and I will decide what to do with it. Not you, not him, not anyone else." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Even the suited man's steps slowed above, as if her declaration had cut through the smoke and shadows. Her father's voice broke with grief, "Amara, please," and the suited man's laugh cracked like glass. "You are stronger than him already." But before another word could fall, the stairwell erupted in light muzzle flashes, slicing the dark as the battle surged again. The agents fired back, the marshal shouted commands, smoke filled the tunnel, and Amara was pulled backward by Leela as bullets sparked against stone. The page inside her jacket pressed hot against her chest, and she knew the final choice was coming, fast, because the world would not let her carry truth quietly. She clutched it with both hands, whispering to herself, "I will choose my own ending," and as the firefight roared around her, she stepped toward the light of the stairwell, ready to face both her father and his enemy, and to decide which future would survive the fire. The stairwell rattled with thunder, as bullets tore into stone and sparks lit the dark like fragments of lightning. Amara's breath shook in her throat, but her legs carried her forward, as if the truth burning in her jacket had taken control of her steps. The marshal shouted for her to stay back. The agents tried to form a wall of protection, but she moved through them with Leela at her side. The envelope torn open, the page now pressed against her chest like a second heart. The suited man appeared through the smoke, his figure tall, his jacket scorched, his eyes alive with the fire of obsession. Behind him, shadows moved, his men pressing forward with weapons raised, but his gaze never left Amara. He raised a hand commanding them to hold their fire, as if the war itself had narrowed to a single girl, standing in the center of a ruined tunnel. His voice rang through the smoke, heavy with triumph and sorrow. "You opened it," he said, and his eyes flicked to her jacket. "You saw the blood he spilled. Tell them all what your father really is." Amara trembled, her mouth dry, but she raised her voice, strong enough to cut through the chaos. "I saw his order, I saw his words, but I also saw the hand that wrote them shaking. I saw regret inked into the margins, and I know now that the truth is not a clean blade. It is jagged, and it cuts everyone who holds it." The suited man's face twisted, half fury, half pain, and he shouted, "There were no margins for us, no apologies for the graves he left. My family, my people, burned because of his pen, and now you must carry that fire forward, or you are no better than him." Amara's heart cracked under the weight of his grief. She wanted to believe her father had been forced, his hand tied by duty and chains of power, but the page told her he had known, and he had signed anyway. The marshal's voice cut in hard and steady. Do not let him bind you with his vengeance. Vengeance is a chain as heavy as silence. Choose something different. And then another voice echoed through the tunnel. Her father's voice, no longer static but strong because he had arrived. From the far end of the tunnel, a second team pushed through their lights, cutting beams through the smoke, and in the center walked her father, tall, older than she remembered, lines carved deep into his face, but his presence still carrying the weight of command. His voice boomed, Amara, listen to me. I did what I had to do to save thousands, though it destroyed me inside. You cannot let them use that page to undo everything that has kept this country standing. The suited man laughed, sharp and broken. Save thousands by burning dozens. A father of nations, but a murderer of children. Do not let him dress it in patriotism, Amara. The blood of Damascus belongs to him. The tunnel shook under the weight of both men's voices. Amara's tears streamed hot, her chest split between love and horror, between loyalty and justice. She felt the paper in her jacket heavier than iron, and she realized this was the moment that would define not just her but the legacy of everyone who had bled for secrets. Leela whispered in her ear, you do not owe them their war, you owe yourself your truth. Her hand was steady on Amara's arm, reminding her that she was not alone. Her father took a step forward, his eyes pleading now, softer than before. I am not asking you to erase what I did. I am asking you to see the weight I carried to keep you safe. If you reveal this page, they will not only destroy me, they will consume you too, because you carry my blood. The suited man stepped closer, his voice breaking with rage and grief. And if you bury it, the children who burned will never rest, the families will never heal. And you will live, knowing you chose lies over truth. Amara's legs trembled, and the noise of battle around her faded because all she could hear was their voices, one of love, one of vengeance, both demanding chains around her throat. She pressed her hand over the page, and for the first time she spoke not to them, but for herself. She said, enough. The word cracked like thunder. Enough of being a shield for secrets and a weapon for grief. Enough of being dragged by pasts that are not mine. I read the truth, and it is ugly, and it is heavy, but it is mine now. Both men froze, eyes locked on her, as if she had stolen the ground from beneath their feet. She stepped forward, voice steady, though her body shook. I will not destroy him, and I will not sanctify him. I will not carry your vengeance, and I will not bury your pain. I will make the truth known, but not as a weapon. As a lesson. She pulled the page from her jacket, held it high where every camera, every phone, every eye could see. The agents gasped. The marshal shouted, Amara, no, but it was too late. The suited man's men raised their weapons, but he stopped them, his face stunned. Her father's face drained of color, his voice cracking, Amara, please. But she spoke louder than them all, her voice echoing through the broken tunnel. This is the page my father signed. This is what was hidden. This is what men killed and lied and bled to bury. The world will see it, not through vengeance, not through silence, but through witness. Let the world judge, not me. She dropped the page to the ground between them. The marshal stepped forward, recording device live, transmitting the document to secure lines to every authority that could not be silenced. It was out. The secret was no longer theirs to cage. The suited man fell to his knees, his face streaked with tears, because the truth he had carried like a blade was now freed, and he no longer knew who he was without it. Her father staggered, his shoulders collapsing as if the weight he had carried for decades had finally crushed him. His eyes filled with tears, not only of shame but of relief, because though it destroyed him, it also ended the war he had fought to keep hidden. Gunfire fell silent. The men lowered their weapons. The tunnel breathed again. Amara stood in the middle, her chest heaving, her face wet with tears, but her spine unbroken. She whispered to herself and to them all, the truth does not heal wounds, but it stops them from festering. I will live with scars, not with chains. Layla wrapped her arm around her, holding her steady, whispering, you did it, you chose your own ending. The marshal nodded, her eyes fierce but softened with respect. You did what neither of them could. You ended it. Her father sank to the ground, his voice faint. I am sorry, Amara. I should have told you. I should have carried it with you. She knelt beside him, touched his trembling hand. I cannot erase what you did, but I will not let it define what I become. The suited man whispered brokenly. Then maybe the children will finally rest. In that tunnel filled with smoke and scars, the war ended. Not with a bullet, but with a choice. Days later, the world exploded with headlines. The page leaked across every screen, every nation, debating, every pundit dissecting, but none of that noise mattered to Amara. She walked quietly through the city with Layla at her side, her father facing trials that would decide his fate, but no longer hiding in shadows. She carried scars deep and invisible, but she also carried freedom. She had chosen not silence, not vengeance, but truth. And in the quiet of her heart, she held a lesson carved from fire. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find who you really are. The end.